right, good morning, everyone. Welcome. As you come in, you're welcome to put your name, pronouns, and your organization in the chat just so we can see everyone that's here. And thanks so much for joining us. We'll give it a couple minutes for everybody to come in, and then we'll get started. Welcome. So as you come in, just putting your name, pronouns, organization in the chat. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll get started in just a moment here. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll give it just another minute. So as you're coming in, name, pronouns, organization in the chat so we can get to know who's here. Just a reminder to mute yourself as you come in if you can.
Okay, I think we could get going.
Okay, awesome. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We're so happy to see you this morning. This is our first of two webinars this summer on the 9th Northwest Regional Power Plan. So first one here, we'll be talking about everything you need to know about the power plan and how you can get involved. Just a reminder, this will be recorded. We're going to share it on our YouTube and on our website and on our socials. So if you want to watch it again, you're welcome to. We'll also send it to all the registrants after the webinar, and you're welcome to share it with anyone you think would like to see the webinar. Let's get to it. So just a little bit about us. We're the Northwest Energy Coalition. We're an alliance of more than 100 environmental, civic, and human service organizations, utilities, and businesses in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, and British Columbia. And our mission is to advance clean, equitable, and affordable energy policies by leveraging our analytic expertise and convening a broad alliance of people and organizations. My name is Sarah Burleson. I'm our communications manager, and I'll introduce a couple of my colleagues that you'll be seeing today. Zachariah Baker, who is our regional and state policy director, and Fred Hewitt, our senior policy associate. They'll be presenting this morning, as well as Ellie Gasparini. She's our events and membership manager, and she'll be managing the chat and the Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please reach out to Ellie. So our agenda this morning, Zach's going to walk us through background on the power plan as well as a timeline and opportunities for how you can get engaged. After he speaks, we'll have a quick about 10 minutes for Q&A. And then Fred will go into the technical part of how the 9th plan is shaping up so far, what we're seeing, and some key issues and improvements. And then we'll have a lot more time after Fred speaks for Q&A at the end. You're welcome to ask questions throughout the webinar in the chat, and then Ellie will gather those and get them to Zach and Fred in the Q&A sections. If we don't get to your question this morning, we'll make sure to follow up after. So we'll get to as many of them as we can today. So please keep those questions coming. And just some ground rules this morning, just a reminder to please stay on mute, and then be respectful, and make sure to share time with other voices. And with that, I'll introduce Zach, who will get us into the power plan. And Ellie's going to share a poll. We'd love to just learn your familiarity with the power plan, your experience with it before. So we'll launch that in a second. And Zach, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. Really appreciate you all joining today. Excited to be able to chat about the power plan. So I'll be sharing a little background on the power plan and then talk about the timeline and engagement opportunities for the 9th power plan. And then I'll pass it over to Fred. Next slide, please. So just to start, with background, background goes all the way back to the 70s and 80s. There was a lot of conversation in the Northwest about a number of different challenges with the energy system, including forecasting load growth, environmental concerns, including hydropower impacts on fish and wildlife, and affordability concerns over failed build out of a fleet of nuclear plants that customers are still paying for to this day. And with that backdrop, Congress passed the Northwest Power Act with a number of key purposes to encourage conservation and efficiency in the use of electric power and the development of renewable resources within the Pacific Northwest, to assure the Pacific Northwest an adequate, efficient, economical, and reliable power supply, and to provide for the participation and consultation of states, local governments, consumers, customers, users of the Columbia River system, federal and state fish and wildlife agencies, Indian tribes, and the public, and to protect, mitigate, and enhance the fish and wildlife of the Columbia River and its tributaries, including related spawning grounds and habitat. And although this is a busy slide to kick off with here, I wanted to put these purposes up because it's really important to see them and also recognize that they were pretty progressive at the time and are still very relevant to the issues of today. And the Northwest Power Act is where the power plan has its roots. Next slide, please. To help move the act forward, Congress authorized the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, which was established in April 1981 through an interstate compact between the four Pacific Northwest states, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington. And the council consists of 8 members, 2 from each state, and they're appointed by their respective governors. And the council has central staff in Portland and staffs in the 4 states, and also staffs a number of multiple public advisory committees that the public can participate in to help inform the work of the council. And overall, the council is charged with overseeing the development and implementation of the power plan, including the Fish and Wildlife Program. Next slide, please. So the Northwest Power Act directed the council to prepare and review a regional conservation and electric power plan, not less than once every 5 years. And then prior to each plan, the council needs to prepare and periodically amend a program to protect, mitigate, and enhance fish and wildlife affected by the Columbia River Basin hydropower system. And then the council needs to develop both the power plan and the fish and wildlife program in a highly public process with broad consultation and participation. And that latter point is a key reason we are pulling this webinar together to help ensure your voice can be heard in the process of shaping the power plan, which has really important implications for our region. So what exactly is the power plan? The power plan is a 20-year plan that aims to ensure an adequate, efficient, economical, and reliable power supply for the Northwest region while mitigating adverse effects on fish and wildlife. Within the 20-year plan, there's a 6-year action plan window, which is where a lot of attention is focused. And Fred will talk a little bit more about some of the recommendations that are coming in the 9th power plan. The power plan has a number of key energy analyses that can help inform the regional conversation. And those include an electricity demand forecast, electricity and fuel price forecasts, an assessment of cost-effective energy efficiency and demand response, least cost generating resources portfolio, and a resource strategy that meets adequacy metrics to ensure the lights stay on as we are meeting our power demands in the Northwest. And then it also includes a number of other recommendations to help move the ball forward on the energy system in the Northwest. Next slide, please. So why is the power plan important? And I think one of the biggest reasons is because it provides guidance to the Bonneville Power Administration on its resource procurement, energy efficiency, fish and wildlife protections, and other energy issues. And for those not familiar with BPA, BPA is the federal agency based in the Northwest that supplies more than 1/3 of the Northwest electric power, primarily from the hydropower dams in the Northwest, and owns and operates 75% of the transmission in the region. So BPA is a very big player, and the power plan has the ability to help provide guidance to ensure that BPA is moving forward in the best interests of the region. And then beyond the direct guidance to BPA, the power plan informs other energy planning and action in the region. It provides key insights into questions of the day, such as load growth and decarbonization. For example, how quickly is load growth happening, and also what are the key drivers? On the decarbonization side, what is the pace and scale that is needed for clean energy resources to be able to meet our clean energy and climate goals in the region? So very important questions provide the Northwest Power Plan provides insight into. And then the region's utilities, regulatory commissions, and policymakers can use the plan and its findings to inform decision making. And the power plan has been a trusted source of regional information analysis and vision since 1983. There have been 8 power plans in the past, with the 9th power plan currently being drafted. Next slide, please. So with that background on the power plan, let's turn a bit to the timeline and opportunities for engagement on the 9th power plan. Next slide, please. So we're focused on the energy side today, but if you remember, I mentioned there's a fish and wildlife program that needs to be done before the power plan is updated and included with the power plan. That fish and wildlife program is almost done, and the draft is issued, and the public comment is closed at this point. The final program is currently under review with possible adoption by the council in June or July. And there's been a lot of great organizing around the plan. Over 1,300 comments were received by the council, and the council will then need to prepare a response to those as part of its efforts. Next slide. On the power plan side, work on the power plan started early last year to develop demand forecasts and scenarios and sensitivities for modeling. And we started seeing the modeling results this spring. And this slide here is a slide from the spring where the council staff was explaining the process moving forward once the modeling results had landed. And so the council has been discussing the results and developing and shaping recommendations since, with the goal of finalizing the draft plan in July. Next slide. While this is happening in June and July as they move towards finalizing the draft plan, there are current opportunities to comment. And as I mentioned, the council is currently reviewing the staff modeling and recommendations. So it's a good time to get in early to be able to help shape those. And if you wanted to participate in the discussion, the council allows public comment at the end of each public meeting. They accept written comments, and there's also informal discussion with council members and staff that can also happen. We included a list of the upcoming council meetings here leading up to the expected July 14th to 15th meeting, where they are currently aiming to approve the draft plan. And that could be pushed a little later in July if it turns out that they need a little more time. So once the draft plan is approved and released, there's a required public comment period with a number of opportunities to engage. And that's really the focus here. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. So you've got it up there. So the comment period on the draft is 60 days minimum, and the council can extend that if they need or want to. The current expectation, if there is a 60-day comment period, would be that the council approves the draft plan at the mid-July meeting, and that comment period would start July 21st because staff would need a couple days to make any changes coming out of the meeting. And then it would run through September 18th. It will include formal hearings for public comment, at least one in each state required, and the council usually schedules one or two per state, plus online options. And those formal hearings will likely start in early August. There will also be opportunity for written comments via an online form or email. And there's also an opportunity for public comment at the council meetings. The council meetings, once the draft plan is released, are scheduled for August 11th to 12th in Seattle, and then September 9th to 10th in Portland. We'll be hosting a second webinar once the draft is released to update you all on the latest in the draft plan and timing of public comment, and hoping that you can join us in the campaign. And on that note, next slide, please. We wanted to give you a little bit of a preview, and Fred will go a lot more deeply into why these are campaign priorities, but wanted to give you the preview now so that you have a sense of the ideas that we are thinking about and hoping the power plan can live up to. And so those include trying to ensure that energy efficiency and demand response and data center flexibility are maximized, that clean energy, including storage, is prioritized for new resources that need to be procured and built, that there are strong fish protections included as a baseline for power planning, that compliance with state and utility clean energy priorities is baked into the decisions that are made, and that affordability, resource adequacy, and reliability are prioritized. And again, ultimately, we're hoping to mobilize diverse and effective public comments on the plan from our coalition members and partners, including tribes, clean energy businesses, and state and local governments, and you here on this webinar. So with that, I'm going to pause there and see if there are any questions based on the information that I've provided, and then we'll turn it over to Fred after that. And I see a question in the chat. What is meant by data center flexibility? So data centers are very large loads, meaning they need to use a lot of energy to do their business. And so when there are peak times where energy use is very high in the region, many large loads are able to kind of ratchet down their operations to be able to be more flexible and basically reduce the energy use that they are using. And that helps the overall system. And so when we say data center flexibility, that is what we are trying to say, is that data centers would be able to ratchet down their energy use, particularly at peak times. And especially there are times where there are energy emergencies, and actually needing to reduce in those periods is also very important. But demand flexibility can also be done outside of emergencies and is an important piece of addressing our region's ability to meet the energy demand. And by having flexibility with data centers and other entities, we as a region can potentially not need to build as many new resources. And there are also other benefits to demand flexibility. I'm just looking at that chat here. So the priorities listed by are the priorities that I discussed listed by priority, And no, I mean, these are all priorities within this priority slide. I think some the beauty of a coalition and the diverse membership that we have is that some members may see themselves more in one of these priorities than others. And it's important that we collectively lift up all of these priorities um, because we have an important need to be able to move forward as a region on all the issues, harkening back to the purposes of the Northwest Power Act that I started my presentation with in moving forward on energy conservation, on renewables, on fish and wildlife protections. These are all really important pieces to the larger picture for our region. I think catching up here, will the plan be based on fish and wildlife plan that omits August spill? So for folks who are not tracking as closely, the fish and wildlife program that is currently under development and close to being finalized, there has been conversation at the council that there may the council has been debating whether to include a measure on spill, which is where more water is spilled on the dams to help with fish passage. And right now, it appears that the council is not going to include the August spill recommendations that the fish managers provided. And today we're very focused on the energy side of the power planning piece, but I know there are folks working on the fish side, on the fish and wildlife program, to try to see if anything can be done there. But I think we are advocating as part of the power plan process to ensure that there are strong fish protection measures that are the baseline for the power planning. Because if you have strong fish protection measures, you then can build on top of the analysis to really understand how we both protect fish and also meet the energy needs of the region. And then just I see a follow up on um, what happens if we have an extremely hot summer, early fall. Will fish protection be sacrificed? There are uh, measures in place that talk about how BPA would, if they needed to, address fish protections in really dire times. And those are on the record. I think what we're hoping with the power planning effort is that we are able to get a power plan that ensures that those actions don't need to be taken and that we both are protecting the fish and meeting the needs of our region's energy needs. Yeah, and thanks, Jim. I see your note about, I thought we were here to talk about the power plan, and we are. And I think it's also important for us to know that there is a real overlap in the multiple demands on our energy system. And so I think it is helpful for folks to understand the fish and wildlife piece. And as we turn to the details of the power plan side of things, it's important to just recognize that this is partly why we have a power plan, right? Is because there are so many important interests that need to be met and addressed through our energy system. And so this is actually a great microcosm to me of why the Power Act was passed and why we have a power plan and why we need a power plan moving forward. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Fred to move us through the power plan.
Hi, hi, everybody. Good morning. Welcome, and thanks for everybody coming on to the call here. You can see some more questions coming in. I might pick up one or two of those before I move forward, but just to say, please keep them coming. Technical questions are welcome. Basic questions are even more welcome. We're trying to get everybody up to speed, and it's not going to be possible to go into every little detail here, but trying to give a general picture and then respond to the issues you're concerned about. Um, uh, Rebecca Wolf asked about major changes in the draft, what the draft ninth plan is looking like compared to we didn't call it the eighth plan, it was called the 2021 power plan, and now the council's gone back to just giving the numbers. There are major differences in a lot of ways, and I won't go into a lot of detail, but I'll say the major thing is we now see a lot more demand growth than we saw in the 2021 plan, partly because of a major portion of it, especially in the next decade, because of the large load and high-tech load growth that we're expecting, which is going to be, it's very uncertain how much what there will be, and I'll talk about that. But also, new state policies have come along, which are pushing up the likely demand in the future for electric power as we decarbonize our energy system, fuels for vehicles and natural gas for various kinds of uses. And moving them onto the power system means higher demand. So that's a longer term issue, although it's already starting. So those are the major changes. There have been a lot of changes also in resource costs, in transmission constraints. We have a long list of things. But again, I think the really major issue for the ninth plan is the anticipated amount of load growth, which is really pretty unprecedented. Going all the way back to the very first power plan in the early 1980s, there had been expectations of large load growth in the Northwest from economic expansion, industrial growth, new population that didn't actually pan out. And by the time of the first plan, the council was very concerned about load growth, but we ended up not having very much. And at the same time, because conservation energy efficiency is the first priority in the Northwest Power Act for the council to address, we got going on conservation, and that has become our really major new resource in the region over the last 4+ decades, the second largest behind hydropower, in fact. And now we're in a situation where new conservation cannot cover all of the new demand that we're anticipating. So I think that's the overall change in where we are now. The uh, I'll get going here hold on the rest of the questions for the time being. Get going on the ninth plan draft. Now we're still in the draft stage. The council staff has put forth a lot of information about their recommendations to the council. The Power Council members take the formal vote on the Fish and Wildlife Program, possibly next week. And then in July, we are anticipating and that will be a final Fish and Wildlife Program. And then in July, the council will vote on approving a draft ninth power plan. So just to get these things in line. And technically, the Fish and Wildlife Program is a part of the Ninth Power Plan. And so it's important to know what all the pieces are in order to get to a final draft of the power plan. Hope that not too complicated to follow. So there's a kind of sequencing that has to happen here over the next few weeks. Going to the power plan itself, first I want to say that the council staff and the advisory committees do a quite a remarkable job, a very thorough job of looking at all of the different aspects of our Northwest power system, electric power system, including relevant other things like what's happening with the natural gas pipeline system, what's happening in the West overall, both the US and Canada in the West, because we're all one big interconnected grid in the West, and a lot of very detailed assessment work, and starting with the demand forecast, which I'll talk about in just a moment, but also including existing and new potential power generation, power plants, the overall state of the transmission system, and so on. So there's a lot of very thorough work. The council's models, they explain them very thoroughly, the planning models that they use, all of the data inputs into the modeling and all of the results are posted publicly on the website. You can go to their website and dig down deep into it if you want to look at detailed spreadsheets and other kinds of reports. It's all there. The council meetings are public and they not only webcast them, but they also make replays available very quickly, usually by the next day. And the advisory committee meetings are all open. So they are carrying forward on the requirements of the Power Act to have a fully public process. And I think it's important to recognize that. Council staff is not that big, actually. Their budget is set by the Northwest Power Act and really hasn't changed very much over the years. So they do a very efficient work with the money that they're given. And I think that they represent the interests of the states because the council is a state compact, not a federal agency. I think they represent the interests of our states quite well. That said, we do have times when we think that their work can be improved, and we want to recognize here both what we think that the Northwest Energy Coalition are the good parts of the ninth plan draft so far and what parts can be improved. So having now said all of that, the demand forecast. This is a forecast of electric power demand over the next 20 years. They do a very thorough job looking at all the different sectors of the economy, looking at developments in technology and policy and you name it. Also, a very deep look at climate change and what the impact is on the electric system, both on the supply side, for example, on hydropower, on wind and solar, which are all affected by climate and weather change, and certainly on the demand side where, just for an example, we're going into a very big heat wave here in the Northwest over the next week. Those kinds of things are happening more frequently now, in part, not all, but in part because of climate change. So the council really has an excellent approach to demand forecasting. And what we see this time is a really rapid and sustained demand growth with a very large range of uncertainty. And I want to double emphasize that. The uncertainty we're seeing in the load forecast is not a fluke. It's the result of a couple of key trends, one of which is the rapid expansion of data centers and other high tech, which is also at the same time not entirely clear how much and how fast will happen. Uh, Another factor is that, as I mentioned, in the past, we've been able to cover most of our load growth with conservation and some new resources, generating resources, but that won't be enough this time. However, it's important to note the staff is focusing on the importance of prioritizing the really good conservation that is cost effective, meaning it's as cheap as or cheaper than alternatives, and that also, by pushing conservation forward a little faster, helps provide a little bit more flexibility for the overall system. So those are important points to mention on the demand forecast. If you can go to the next slide, we can take a little bit of a look I'm not going to try to read through all those charts on the right. This is from the council staff, and you can find this and lots of other material on their website. But just reflecting the thoroughness of their approach, looking at, as I mentioned, economics, transportation, data centers, high tech, buildings. And then one interesting aspect is how much hydrogen might be used within the region over the next couple decades, which would require a lot of electrification to create the hydrogen. And the uh, the overall conclusion is that future energy demand could increase over the next 20 years by 50 to 100%. That's a very wide range. And the peaks also grow significantly. Next slide, if you could. Just to illustrate this, this is, and climate A is one of the three climate submodels that the council uses based on global climate models and some downscaling. The, as you can see on this chart, the squiggly line on the left there is the amount of demand we've had over the last decade or so. And then you can see the bars showing the low end and the high end of a possible range for energy demand growth. So we're roughly around 24,000 megawatts average. Um, that's 100 megawatts, or let's say 1,000 megawatts is roughly speaking as much as 1 million homes use. It's a little less when you count industry and commercial use as well. But it's 1,000 megawatts is pretty big. Industrial demand is large and growing. Commercial demand is large also. But if you look at the entire region, 24,000 megawatts average around year round, the peak amount is these days around 35 or 36,000 megawatts on a really cold or really hot day. So just keep those two numbers in mind, 24,000 and 36,000. As the years go forward in the forecast, demand growth could reach as average demand could go from 24,000 to as high as 40,000 or more, or as little as around 30,000. That's a huge range. That's about half the size of the current system. So this is a tremendous variability ahead, and we have to prepare for that. But it's not like we just have to roll the dice. There are a lot of things that can be done to meet the load growth we know will happen, and then get ready for the part that may still happen beyond that. Next slide, please. Focusing on high tech, and that includes both data centers and other large uh, chip manufacturing and other things. For example, we have Intel here in the Portland area, Micron in Boise, and other facilities around the region. A lot of them are expanding. Together, the amount of new load from high tech, the council estimates to be, let's look at 2032, a low end of about 1,000 new megawatts, more likely 2,000, kind of a medium, and a high load growth by 2032 of 5,000, nearly 5,000 megawatts. That's a huge expansion for a region that currently has about 25,000 total. So you can see the impact of the load forecast for high tech. And the important thing to note is the wide uncertainty around that. We can't plan 10 years ahead exactly. We have to be ready for a lot of different possible outcomes. So we can go to the next slide. So now moving from the load forecast to the modeling. And what the council does is they have very a suite of models. I won't go into the details unless there's questions. Looking at all the different factors and then projecting. They don't pick every year. They pick a few example years because it's a lot of work to run all the models, thousands and thousands of modeling runs for each year. But they pick every couple of years and go all the way out to 20 years and look at not just kind of expected use, but rather something that looks at different possibilities for demand, for power supply generation, and system conditions. And as we'll see, some of those look at different options for hydro operations to support fish passage. So those sensitivities include all the existing resources we've got now: conservation, demand response, wind, solar, geothermal, gas storage. We have some coal still in the region, and we have a nuclear plant in the existing resources. And for new resources, it looks at all of them and mostly selects the clean ones plus some gas. The sensitivities, there are 13 of them, and I'll show very briefly what they look like. Uh, Provide overall guidance. They're not the plan itself or the strategy itself. It's a way of looking at a different look at the region's potential futures, so the council and we can consider what the options are. And the guidance is also providing not only for a 20-year resource strategy, but also targets and kind of short-term resource strategy for the action plan period that goes through 2032. Next slide, please. This is a council slide that I won't really read, but just in here, and you can take a look later, to say that, the kind of the factors that the council's including in these sensitivities, and you'll note on the left-hand side different options or possibilities for resources and transmission. On the right-hand side, four different options for hydro operations that can support fish passage. Next slide, please. And this again looks at this is the list of all the resources that the council considers. The ones with the stars are the ones that are modeled very in a detailed fashion for the modeling, the ones that are most expected to be available and provide service. So some of these could happen. For example, biomass energy can happen, but the council did not give it a very detailed update review and so forth. Uh, but a lot of these things are considered, not all of them are included in the resource strategy. So certainly uh, utility scale solar, onshore wind, renewables, small renewables, gas, either combined cycle that run most of the time, and simple cycle that run on peak, battery storage, and other kinds of renewables and storage. So the also referred to as hybrids. And then some new potential resources, conventional geothermal. We have a little bit of that in the Northwest, and there's obviously more interest in that now. Offshore wind, which has been a lot of attention to it, but right now it doesn't look like it's going to happen very quickly. And pump storage. Um, and then some emerging technologies, so-called clean baseload, long duration storage, and clean peakers and medium duration storage. Those are kind of catch-all categories, and there's a lot under the hood for all of those. So next slide, please. And now we're going to go to the modeling results that we've seen so far. Can go to the next slide. This, I will not go through every little bit of this slide in detail, but just to say, this is the result for the 13 sensitivities that the council staff reviewed. And you can see on the left-hand side the four that relate to hydro operations. And then there's a variety of others, including constraint or expanded transmission, uh, fast or slow emerging technologies, and so forth. All the details are in the council staff presentations. Next slide, please. This is the 2032 build out, and you'll see that there is not as much variation among them, but then again, this is just through the next few years. Nonetheless, you can see some variations, particularly in the hydro operations. There's more difference in those first four bars than there was in the 2046 results. But they're all within relatively similar range, and this shows the megawatts, the amount of new generation or new supply for each of the different resources. The council's also prepared some slides that show the cost. And again, some variation, but it's not a huge range on what we might see. Next slide. So now that the council staff put forward all the different sensitivities, they've also made some recommendations about the amount of resources that should be in the draft plan and also on actions that the council itself and that the region can take in the next action plan period through 2032. So they're separate, but they're kind of interrelated presentations that the council staff has made. So you can go to the next slide. First, again from the council, a slide that says, what is a resource strategy? Basically, it's the recommendation for the kinds of resources, the new resources, and the amounts, the magnitude needed for the power plan. And they quote uh, some elements of the Northwest Power Act that refer to that. And then the resource strategy, the other recommendations kind of go along with that. Next slide. Again, from the council, portfolio of resources. This is very important to understand. In the past, power planning often, not with the council, but often with utilities, tended to focus on one or two types of new resources. But it became clear, especially in the last couple of decades, that we really need a broader portfolio of resources. This is a more complicated thing to consider, but we have a lot of different options now for new power generation, for demand response, for energy efficiency conservation, load flexibility, whatever categories you want. And how can they be put together in a, a, a package, a portfolio that is the best fit for our needs and is also least cost and least risk. So that's a complicated thing, and the models do a pretty good job of this. We still have some concerns about where the council has landed on it, but it's important to understand a portfolio of resources also provides diversity because no resource is perfect. And having more resources is more complicated to manage, but also gives us a better result. Think of your own investments. You don't want to put everything into one stock or investment. You want to have a portfolio to accommodate different possibilities. So that's what the council really focuses on. And they have a portfolio both for the action plan period and for the 20-year long run period as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about the details now, focusing mostly on the 2032 time period. And then the council's, again, one more slide from the council and recommendations. The recommendations, the resource strategy is the type and amount of new resources. The recommendations include a lot of, there are dozens of them, to help steer the council and the region forward on accomplishing what the resource strategy lays out. A lot of them are really good, and we're very supportive of many of those recommendations. Some need to be strengthened, and there are a couple that we think should be added. So just to say, that's the council slide, and we can go to the next slide here. One more council slide. This is just to say how they are structuring the ninth power plan draft. You can read this later, but it basically shows, basic issues that they're going to address and the order of those topics. And next slide. Now, this one we will focus on a bit, and we're going to go into more detail, but let me give you an overview of this. This is for 2032, and we are really focusing on 2032. It's within the next decade. It's addressing our immediate and near future needs. It helps us get off on the right footing for the long term. And as you can see, there's actually quite a variety of things going on in this table that is the council staff's resource strategy recommendation. And they actually presented two options, one of which has a bit more renewables and one of which has a bit more natural gas. And then they ran the models and looked at what happens with each of them. For example, when you have a bit more renewables, you also have a bit more conservation. If you have a bit more gas, you'll have a little bit less conservation, and so forth. But let me go through and focus on option one here because that's what the staff prefers. It helps make a more robust system, more resource adequacy overall. And that's what they're recommending to the council. But the council can also look at option two as well. It's not that different, but there is a little bit of difference. So the first thing to notice here is the council's recommending 1,060 average megawatts of conservation. And that is well above what the modeling results that we showed earlier would have. The most of the conservation in the sensitivities was in the range of about 600 megawatts, which we didn't like because it's actually less than what was in the 2021 plan in the face of much greater load growth. An important thing to understand about conservation is we're already getting a lot of the cheap and good conservation. You'd have to make things a lot more expensive in the system as a whole before you get a whole lot more conservation. So our feeling is 1,060 megawatts by 2032 is actually not a bad place to be. We could always use more, but relative to what the modeling was showing, this is an improvement. An important note here that I'll come back to is if you can see this, the staff is listing amounts per megawatt hour for conservation in Oregon and Washington versus in Idaho and Montana. In other words, they're recommending a kind of split target for conservation. And I'll explain later why we do not think that their proposal is a good one. But I'll come back to that in a little bit. Second, on demand response, this includes things that help manage power demand with things like your water heater or your air conditioning or a big industrial facility or commercial lighting that can be managed and so forth. Demand response can include things that are customer managed. If you get a signal from your utility says, please turn down your power, and you go turn the thermostat down a couple degrees, that's one kind of demand response. Another kind is the utility has direct access to your water heater and can ramp that up or down, although you will always get the hot water you need. So that's more of a direct control kind of or automated kind of demand response. And of course, you can have automated thermostats and all other kinds of options. Anyway, as we'll be describing, there's a lot of demand response. So 590 megawatts of demand response is a pretty good number, but not good enough in our view. And I'll come back to talk about that. Another kind of demand response is done by utilities on local power lines, the lines that go to your house, go up and down the street and go to your house. That's called voltage regulation. There's a couple hundred megawatts of it. It shows up in all the sensitivities. The model's picking as much as it can, and so the council staff is recommending that. On renewables, that's primarily solar and wind. We will, other potential renewables. But the renewables at this point for 2032, the council's recommending basically 9,300 megawatts in option one, 9,000 in option two. That's a lot. But there's a whole lot ready to go. The biggest issue for the renewables is getting the transmission to get them onto the grid. And that's a separate topic that I won't get into right now. But 9,000 is a lot, but it is a doable amount in our view. On energy storage, which is primarily lithium-ion batteries, same kind of batteries in your phone or lots of other devices, but you put a whole lot of them together, you can come up with a big storage facility that can be 1 megawatt, 100 megawatts, whatever size you want, pretty much can be put a lot of places around the grid. The storage is a really big difference from the 2021 plan. The council's recommending a whole lot of it. We've seen the value of battery storage in other parts of the country, in California and Texas, most especially, and we're starting to see a lot of battery storage in the Northwest. So the council is recommending a lot by 2032, 5,200 megawatts. I want to point out that Portland General Electric alone is planning to add about 2,000 more megawatts by 2030. So this is also a target that looks high, but it's also within reach. And finally, the council's recommending, staff is recommending 2,000 megawatts in option one of new natural gas power plants. By and large, in both the 2032 and the 2046 modeling, most of the gas that the models are gas power plants, the models picking are peaker plants, meaning they only run when demand is high, when it's very hot, very cold. Uh, some can be what are called combined cycle plants that mostly run around year round. The council recommendation here doesn't distinguish between them, but the modeling basically prefers the peaker plants because you don't want to run gas plants when they're expensive to run and not really needed. But there is likely to be some combined cycle construction in the region. So 2,000 megawatts, that's a lot. It's a lot more than we've done recently, but it's less than the modeling was indicating. The modeling was picking around 3,000 megawatts by 2032. So this represents, we think, a reasonable view of the council staff about the availability of new gas power plant equipment, what it can, how long it takes, and the need to probably build some new pipeline capacity to meet a big build out. So 2,000 megawatts is kind of, you could see that happening. We're still not happy with it, but at least it's a more reasonable thing than what we saw in the modeling. Maybe I should stop here and then go back through the chat and just see if there's a few points I can pick up on. Um,
Yep.
there's a lot to go through, so if that's a good idea, I will.
Hey Fred, I can just post a recap of the ones I've pulled here for you to go through.
Okay, yeah, I see there's quite a lot.
Yeah, we've had a lot of crowdsourcing of responses, which is great.
So let me see, what's the best way to do this? Um, Now I have to scroll through all of the introductions. Okay, we'll
Hey
get
Fred,
there.
if you just go down to the bottom, I just posted a recap of the questions that
Okay, well
come
we'll
in.
try. Well, I'll use that, and if we miss out on somebody's question, we can get to that as well. Hold on, I have to. It's not this scrolling is not easy to do here. So okay. Oh, sorry, I'm having Zoom issues here. Ah,
Yeah, and I do think it's okay, Fred, because I think most of these
here,
questions have been
and I'm cutting and
answered.
pasting because it was really hard to do z- uh, to do this with the Zoom. So hold on one sec, and I'll get to you right. All right.
I think though, Fred, I think Zach mentioned that a lot of these have been answered. So Zach, are
Yeah.
there any
Yeah,
that,
Well,
I would,
I'll take what Ellie has given me, and I haven't had time to read through all the
yeah.
Q&A yet.
I think Fred, you should.
right, but yeah, go ahead.
I would just roll into the rest of the presentation that you have,
Okay.
because
Well,
I
I
think,
captured what Ellie put in, kind of summary, and I can come back to those. But let me do that. I'll go ahead and finish up. It shouldn't take too much longer. All right, now we'll talk about what we see as key issues and improvements for what the staff has presented. Next slide. So the good part, as I mentioned some of these already, first, the plan is consistent with state clean policies, clean energy policies like Washington and Oregon, and utilities have announced some targets as well, for example, Idaho Power. So that's good. We think that the recommendations are really good on conservation, renewables, and storage. So as I mentioned, 1,060 megawatts for conservation. Importantly, 435 of that for Bonneville conservation. Bonneville does not deliver conservation directly, but they coordinate the work of their 135 plus uh, customer utilities, preference customers, which includes uh, municipal, PUD, and co-op utilities, tribal utilities, federal agencies. And those utilities deliver the actual conservation, but Bonneville helps coordinate it. This has been going on since the Power Act, pretty much since the Power Act began. And it's a very important, one of the important parts of the Power Act says that Bonneville should follow what the power plan directs Bonneville to do to the extent that they can, or explain why they're not. So Bonneville has, in fact, done a pretty good job with some ups and downs of following the power plan's uh, direction on how much conservation to do. So note that this is actually a pretty big factor in the overall regional conservation. The other part would be done by the investor-owned utilities. So 1,060 for conservation, 435 for BPA, 9,000, as I mentioned, for renewables, 5,200 for storage. And here there's an overlap because some of the storage is part of hybrids, like a solar plus battery storage facility, and some is standalone. So it's a little complicated to explain. And the other important thing about this is the renewables and the storage are spread out across the region. That's very important for weather dependent resources like wind and solar, because if it's not so windy over here, it might be windier over there and so forth. So that's very important as well. And as I mentioned, the many, many actions that I will not go into detail here for conservation, renewable storage, and transmission that are in the recommendations that the staff has prepared. So next slide. There is something that needs more review, and that is the cost of new gas power plants. Now, the council is not, I'm not really pointing the finger at them. The costs have just zoomed up over the last year since the amounts for the council plan were locked in. The council currently says, the inputs say $1,500 per kilowatt of capacity for new combined cycle plants, the big ones that operate most of the time. Electric Power Research Institute current research says that cost is basically double. And, it could go up, might stay around the same, might go down a little bit, but it's a lot more. Likewise, for peaker plants, which are those ones that only operate during peak times, the council input is around 1,100 a kilowatt. The city of Austin, Texas voted 2 weeks ago, behind closed doors, by the way, for new gas peakers for their municipal utility at $2,500 a kilowatt, more than double. In addition, if you have a big build out of gas in the Northwest, then that will require some new pipeline expansion, which is very expensive and takes a long time. So we think that the gas costs need another look here. So next slide, please. There is a lot that could still be done on demand response, and I already talked about kind of what demand response is. The staff has 220 megawatts for distribution reduction, which is good. Voltage reduction, that's good. 590 for general demand response. A lot of it is actually for electric vehicle time of use rate, which is a rate measure. That's good. But a lot of the available demand response is not being picked in the modeling. And I'll talk about that a bit more in the next slide. And most importantly, while the staff will likely recommend, hey, we haven't seen the details yet, based on advice from the advisory committees, a model conservation standard for data centers, which will primarily address energy efficiency, there's nothing at all for load management and flexibility. On the one hand, it's understandable because we don't really have good examples yet of that kind of flexibility in operation around the country. But it's the hot topic if you read the energy media these days. How much can we get? And certainly, if we're looking at new tech demand growing by 2 to 5,000 megawatts in the next 5 or 6 years, we ought to get way more than zero. So we're not exactly sure yet what we will say to the council, exactly how we will propose going forward, but we're going to have a small working group to discuss that and come up with some recommendations for the staff and the council to consider in the draft plan. Next slide, please. And just to mention about the amount of demand response that's available, the council has assessed this in great detail. I won't give the details from this eye chart, obviously. Lots and lots of well-established measures. The council estimates by 2046, 6,500 megawatts of demand response. Now that's a peak in 2046 of maybe 40,000 megawatts. That's a lot. And at the cost, less than the cost of new gas. In fact, 2/3 of it is probably half the cost of gas or less. And about half or more of that potential 6,500 megawatts could theoretically be deployed by 2032. So there's a lot more potential for demand response than the current staff recommendation. Next slide, please. Now the one that we think really does need a reset. As I mentioned earlier, council staff is proposing two targets for conservation, one for Oregon and Washington, and one for Idaho and Montana. And this is their slide that describes some more of the background for that. The council's modeling does show some support for different cost effectiveness for conservation in different parts of the region. But this is a relatively new development in the modeling, and we're concerned that the proposed approach is really not going to be effective in what we need to look at. So next slide. Just a few comments on this. So they have, as I mentioned, limited modeling for multiple conservation target zones. The separation of a single conservation target into multiple zones, two or more, would break the precedent we've had for all the way back. Noting that when you look at the states, Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, Montana, the climate zones we have do not uh, reflect those state boundaries really at all. Think about Washington State, where we have the Puget Sound area, Portland, Vancouver, the corridor, from the Columbia Gorge on east, the Columbia Corridor, and Eastern Washington, all quite different. And a single state target really would not make sense. In addition, within each climate zone or area that we look at, the publicly owned and investor-owned utilities are quite different. The publicly owned utilities always had lower costs because of a lot of hydro and therefore less gas, for example. And so there are opportunities for the investor-owned and publicly owned areas for new conservation are actually somewhat different. So that adds more complexity. And finally, we're really concerned that a split target with a much higher amount for the west side for Oregon and Washington and less so for the east side would diminish east side weatherization in particular for homes. And that would make BPA's conservation program coordination really, really hard to do. It's already complicated enough. So next slide. So just summary, thanks for bearing with me through all this. We are proposing a couple of things to rebalance the resource strategy while accounting for new gas power plant costs, recognize better recognition for the availability of cost-effective programmatic demand response, adopt some kind of target for data center load management, and finally, although I didn't talk about this, it's quite complicated but important, the council currently has limits on imports across the AC and DC interties from California and the Southwest that really are too low. They're old from, long ago, need to be updated. The council staff is recommending another look at that. But if those amounts are raised to reflect what we're actually seeing during peak periods, it will help diminish the need for new resources within the Northwest. Very important, as mentioned already, don't force in poorly designed conservation zones along state boundaries. Still an open question about what to do about that, but we think the state boundaries idea is really not a good one. And finally, again, to underscore the importance that the value of a strong ninth power plan will be for fish and wildlife protection by reducing the pressure to operate the hydro system as hard as we do now and provide more flows for fish when they need it. Next slide. And then I'll pass it back to Zach here at the appropriate moment. We can talk about the priorities. Is this a good time now to go through all of the Q&A? Thoughts
Yeah.
from Zach or Ellie?
Thanks, Fred. I do think this is a good breaking point here, and this slide is just the slide that I ended with on my presentation, and now you have much more background from what Fred shared of why these are priorities that we are working towards, and we will be continuing to try to mobilize folks, and we'll have one more slide on that, but do you want to give folks an opportunity to ask any questions based on what Fred had shared?
Yeah, let me do this. We have some time here, so I'll spend a few minutes kind of skimming through the comments we've already gotten and do quick answers as best I can. I won't probably be able to cover all of it because there's been a lot. This is great. We will take the chat and make sure that we respond in writing to all of it, at least in summary fashion. So we can, send that out later. Let's see. We've talked about looking through what we've got here.
Ellie put together a summary of the real questions, getting away from the chatter.
No, let me just go through as I've said. Just scrolling through here, so hang on. Linda Engel asked about clean energy generation. For us, clean are things that don't emit and don't, have a minimal or minimized environmental impact overall. There are arguments, especially about nuclear. Personally, I will say I don't think of nuclear as all that clean. It doesn't emit, it doesn't, it doesn't have greenhouse or pollutant emissions when it generates power, but there are lots of other issues with nuclear that make it less than clean, in my view. Uh, let's see, I'm just scrolling through here. I'm going to pass over some of the comments about salmon here. The uh, Jim made a comment about the amount of resources in the Bonneville interconnection queue. Tremendous amount there, far more than we really would need, far more than Bonneville can build. Bonneville's got two big important initiatives to expand their transmission grid. We are very supportive of that. It will help a lot to get the new renewables that we want in the in the power plant in the Northwest. Conventional geothermal, I'm referring there to traditional geothermal. We have a little bit in the Northwest. We're relatively shallow, hot uh, water and rock. We can drill down and get the power directly out of it. The more enhanced geothermal, this is the new form we're hearing a lot about now, takes some techniques from oil and gas fracking, directional drilling, and explode the rocks a little bit to provide circulation. A lot of possibility for it, but it's not really an existing resource yet, although it's on the way. Any day now, really, if you look at Fervo in Utah. And so the council did not consider it to be directly available at this point. However, the model does pick geothermal as soon as it is allowed to pick it, in this case, starting in 2034. So we're going to see a lot more geothermal, just that it's not quite at the point where the current plan can really fully include it. Hold on, I'm struggling here with the chat. Does the removal of funding, I'm sorry, I'm just not seeing that. Does the removal of funding for Hydrogen Hub impact the anticipated adoption of hydro technologies? This is a kind of this kind of moving target right now. The council does consider the hydrogen demand for electric power as potentially being very large. I think it's kind of, on the margins right now, what's going to happen with that. We're not done, even though the federal funding for the hydrogen hubs has gone away, hydrogen is not going away. It's just going to have a, somewhat reduced, but I still think important role in the region. That's my kind of informal answer to that. Let's see here. Sorry, the scrolling on this Zoom chat is really difficult. So sorry for that. Let's see. And again, apologies if I'm skipping yours, but I'm going to do the best I can. How would a more friendly federal administration in 2.5 years affect planning? To be determined. That's a big topic. Um, and I will note, though, that the council generally does an interim kind of update in the middle of each plan. So there will be a ninth plan update in a couple of years. Don't know the timing and the details yet, but that will be coming. Um, does the power plan account for duplicated data center demand between utilities? Yes, to some degree, as much as you can. I think the council's been pretty careful about that. But, a lot is conjectural. How much of the submissions to different utilities actually is duplicated, we don't know. Transparency is a really big, important topic on data centers, one that we're addressing, and Zach really led the effort, helped lead the effort in Washington on that. We have the Data Center Advisory Committee here in Oregon, uh, interest in the other states. It's a big issue because if you can't manage what you are not measuring. So that's an important aspect. Uh, just keeping going here. Uh, how enforceable, Kathleen asked about how enforceable the plan is. It's a complicated question. Directly speaking, the power plan doesn't force anybody to do anything. However, it's important to note, and Jim noted this also, that Washington law requires that Washington state utilities follow the plan with respect to energy conservation. And the Power Act also has requirements for Bonneville to follow the directives of the power plan to the extent feasible. And if not, they then have to basically explain why not. So it's not like a direct guidance thing the way it is with the Fish and Wildlife Program, which really does basically set budgets and provide a lot of other detail. But at the same time, the council's plan has the best inputs, the best oversight, the best transparency, and the best modeling, so we really should be paying attention to it. And our utility IRPs, integrated resource plans, and new resource acquisition really ought to be paying more attention as we go forward to the council's plan because it does provide that regional view and a strong direction forward. And I'm still scrolling here. Sorry. The Zoom scrolling just zooms back and forth. It's really difficult to deal with. Sorry about that. And we can't, unfortunately, cut and paste the entire thing all at once. But we will, as I said, respond to all of it after the call here. Question, will this recording be mailed out to the participants? Yes. How would the appointment of Travis Kavula as BPA administrator affect the pace? Not in scope for this call, but it's a very important question. Liz Hamilton asked, will the 4 hydro sensitivities remain after the council votes on the Fish and Wildlife Program? I don't know specifically, but I think the Fish and Wildlife Program determines the primary inputs into the final draft power plan. There may be some more nuances on that, but that's my understanding. Pat asked about the California Southwest transmission limits. It's a long discussion. I think the quick answer is that reflected the history up till about 2015, where we got very little flow from California in the Southwest, except maybe for a few hours in deep winter, high demand periods. We're seeing power flows from the Southwest in California almost literally every day now, not maybe every day, especially right now at the peak of a hydro runoff, but year round. And overall, it's more than half of our total flows now. So it's a really important factor. Let's see if there are any more. Question about transmission cables under the Columbia River. Again, not in scope for this call. It's an important topic. Lots of action on the proposal to put a big new transmission line down the Columbia River. And finally, from Derek, different cost tests for cost effectiveness. The council has a very thorough and somewhat complicated cost effectiveness approach that I will not get into in detail here, but I think that they have a very robust approach that we have a lot of confidence in, but there's still some interpretation that's needed around what they do. And we just got one from Tom Iverson. Is the modeling for the draft plan complete and include a broad range of fish operations? The this is a statement. Yes, effectively the modeling is complete, although the council is going to do some additional checking to make sure that their proposed resource strategy has resource adequacy and built in, and fully incorporates the fish operations that come from the Fish and Wildlife Program. So as Tom said, I think we agree with this, that regardless of the final Fish and Wildlife Program, robust fish operation assumptions are built into the plan. Okay, I think I've covered it pretty much. Apologies if I've missed any that you've asked, and we'll definitely get to those. And we still have 10 more minutes here. So, Zach, however you want to take this forward, it's all yours.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. Appreciate it. And I was going to pick up on one of the questions that was asked about how might a more friendly federal administration in a couple of years affect planning here, especially on fish and wildlife protections. And I think that's just an important thing to recognize, that uh, our energy system is shaped also by politics. And I think why there's so much interest right now, in particular on the fish and wildlife side, is because in the prior administration, there was an agreement that was reached to put into place very important fish protections, and to provide funding to make sure that those protections were able to move forward. And when the new administration came in, they withdrew from that agreement, and there has been a return to litigation for that. And I just bring that up to say that this is another reason why the Power Council and the Power Plan is so important, because it provides a level of consistency for the region to have the conversation, and to ensure that we are considering all the angles of our energy system, and that folks are being informed, the decision makers are being informed by good analysis and robust analysis. And that's where we all come in this effort, is to provide our voices into the process to be able to help influence the decision makers to make the right decision, and to uphold the purposes of the Power Act, no matter what administration is in power. And so I would just, as an entree into the next slide, to just offer that, to say that we have a real role to play here in ensuring that our voices are heard, the voices of the Northwest are heard, and that the decision makers make good decisions. And so with that, just wanted to provide a quick summary reminder on the upcoming actions that you can be involved in and take. So there will be continuing dialogue with the council and staff over the coming months. In mid-July, the council will likely vote on the draft 9th plan, and then there will be a public comment period on the draft plan through from like July 21st to September 18th, assuming that everything stays on track. Those dates might be updated as the conversation continues over the next couple of months. We will have another webinar after the draft plan is released to provide updates for you all on what has changed, good and maybe negative, from the conversation we've already put out there and the analysis that Fred shared. And we'll be working to organize to get comments in at the formal hearings. Again, there's formal hearings in each state. So you may still have to travel far, but you won't have to travel necessarily to the Portland headquarters if that's not where you're based. And then there's always the opportunity for written comments as well. So we really look forward to continuing the conversation with you all and providing the information that you all need, answering the questions, helping us really get a strong power plan that sets us on the right foot moving forward. We included a couple links if you want to do your own kind of research and learn more. And then Fred and I are certainly available for one-on-ones and conversations and the like to help move the ball forward. And I do also want to underscore a comment that was in the chat, that there are a lot of legends on this call who have been not only part of the power plan efforts all the way back to the first power plan, but even before that, with putting together the Northwest Power Act and advocating. And that's partly where the coalition's history lays in that time of challenge in the Northwest and our energy system, questions that were coming up at the time, many of which are still relevant today. So there's a lot of wisdom to tap from in our community, and I do feel like this is a great opportunity for us, and the ninth plan is a really important document and vision for the future of our region moving forward, and looking forward to working with you all to get the best plan we can. And I think with that, we can let folks go for a couple more minutes. We'll take a look at the chat, and we'll, as Fred said, try to address any questions that weren't addressed in the webinar, and we'll get the webinar recording and slides posted. And again, please be in touch, and looking forward to working with y'all in the next couple of months.